Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Bullish Books. I'm Lei, and this is the show where we take the world's most powerful business and personal development books and break them down into the ideas you can actually use. Today's episode might be one of the most important ones I've ever recorded because it's about the hidden forces that are quietly running your life, your investment decisions, your hiring decisions, your relationships, the stories you tell yourself about why you succeed and why you fail. And here's the uncomfortable truth I want to start with today. You are not as rational as you think you are. Not even close. And the proof? It starts with the smartest man who ever lived making one of the dumbest financial decisions in history. In 1720, Isaac Newton, the guy who invented calculus, formulated the laws of motion and essentially built the foundation of modern physics, lost the equivalent of $3 million in a stock market bubble. He had invested early in the South Sea Company, saw the warning signs, sold at a profit, and walked away. Smart move. But then he watched everyone around him, people he privately considered his intellectual inferiors, double and triple their money as the stock kept climbing. The FOMO became unbearable. He bought back in near the peak, and when the bubble collapsed, he was wiped out. He reportedly said afterward, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." Raw intelligence is no defense against how the human mind actually works under conditions of social pressure and narrative momentum. And I know this not just from reading about Newton. I nearly lived my own version of it. I have a PhD. I spent years designing experiments, analyzing data, writing papers. Rigorous, systematic, evidence-based thinking was literally my job. If anyone was immune to sloppy reasoning, I genuinely believed it was me. Then one afternoon, a colleague walked into the lab with a can't-miss investment opportunity. A biotech startup, a hot new gene editing platform, some friends of friends who had gotten in early. The pitch took about 10 minutes. And by the time he finished, I was already mentally calculating how much I could pull from savings. I didn't do due diligence. I didn't ask hard questions. I just felt like it was a good opportunity. The excitement in his voice, the familiar technical jargon, the social proof of people I respected already being involved. It all felt right. I nearly wired the money that same week. I didn't lose my savings, but only because a friend who happened to be a securities attorney asked one uncomfortable question. "Have you actually read the offering documents?" I hadn't. There weren't any. That near miss sent me on a quest to understand why someone trained in careful evidence-based reasoning nearly made a catastrophically impulsive financial decision because of a 10-minute hallway conversation. The answer led me to Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist's life work on how we actually make decisions, and the terrifying gap between that and how we think we make decisions. So let's get into it. Kahneman's central idea is this. You have two operating systems in your brain. He calls them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, and effortless. It's the system that recognizes faces, reads the emotion in someone's voice, and slams your brakes before you even consciously register the car stopping in front of you. It's a pattern-matching machine trained by every experience you've ever had, running constantly, almost entirely outside your conscious control. If you've read my article about habits before, you already know System 1. It's the engine behind every routine you run on autopilot. And that's mostly a great thing. If you had to consciously deliberate every micro-decision from the moment you woke up, you'd be mentally exhausted before breakfast. System 2, on the other hand, is slow, deliberate, and exhausting. It's the system you use for complex math, reading a legal contract, or navigating a new city. It burns mental energy. And here's the critical part. It is fundamentally lazy. Given the choice, System 2 would much rather let System 1 handle things. Most of the time, this division of labor works great. The problem is when System 1 quietly takes over decisions that genuinely need System 2's careful attention. Complex, high stakes, novel situations where fast pattern matching isn't just insufficient, it's actively dangerous. and it does this through a whole menu of cognitive biases that Kahneman spent decades documenting. Let me walk you through the ones I think matter most. First, anchoring. Here's a quick demo. Imagine someone asks you, is the height of the tallest redwood tree more or less than 1,200 feet? Then they ask you to guess the actual height. Now imagine a different group gets the same question, but with 180 feet as the reference point instead. Both groups are estimating the exact same thing, but studies show the first group guesses dramatically higher. Their answers are anchored to the first number they saw, even though it was completely arbitrary. I watched anchoring destroy a negotiation in my own lab. A principal investigator I knew was hiring a postdoc and opened with a salary offer of $42,000, absurdly low, even for academia. The candidate was sharp and probably could have negotiated up to $58,000. Instead, she ended up accepting $49,000. She felt like she'd won because she'd moved the number up, but the PI had set the anchor so low that even a successful negotiation landed her well below market. She didn't lose a fight. She just played on someone else's board. Anchoring is everywhere. The crossed out price on a sale tag, the first number in a salary negotiation, the opening valuation in a funding round. Whoever puts the first number on the table has enormous power, and the antidote is simple. Do your own independent research before any negotiation and set your own anchor before anyone else does. Second, and this is sneaky, Kahneman calls it WYSIATI. What you see is all there is. System 1 builds the most coherent story it can from whatever information is in front of you, and then presents that story as the truth, not as an incomplete picture built from limited data. This is exactly what happened to me with that biotech pitch. I had the excitement in my colleague's voice. I had the familiar technical jargon. I had the social proof of people I respected supposedly already being involved. System 1 assembled those fragments into a vivid, coherent narrative. Hot opportunity, smart money, already in, insider access, and served it up to me as insight. It wasn't. It was fiction. And here's the twist. Expertise can actually make this worse. When I was deep in my own research specialization, I had this incredibly coherent story about how my field worked, where the opportunities were, which approaches were worth pursuing. The coherence of that story felt like wisdom, but coherence isn't accuracy. Sometimes a story hangs together beautifully precisely because you've unconsciously edited out the inconvenient facts. The fix? Before any major decision, actively ask yourself, what information am I not seeing? What would change this story? Find someone who disagrees with you and listen, not to argue, but to genuinely understand what their version of the story is built on. Third, the expert illusion. This one is uncomfortable. One of the most important findings in Thinking, Fast and Slow is that human expertise is far more limited than we assume, especially in complex, unpredictable environments. When researchers analyze the long-term performance of financial advisors and stock-picking experts, the vast majority performed no better than random chance over the long run. But here's the psychological puzzle. The experts themselves didn't know this. They remembered their wins. They built narratives around their wins. They genuinely felt like they had skill. The feeling of expertise is almost entirely disconnected from actual accuracy in complex domains. I got a sharp version of this lesson when I was seriously exploring a move into consulting. During that process, I kept hearing an industry saying that stuck with me, frequently wrong, but never in doubt. The winking version was even sharper. I wasn't wrong. You just didn't follow the instructions correctly. Everyone laughed when they said it. But underneath the humor was something real. In consulting, as in many expert-driven fields, the performance of confidence is often more valued than the accuracy of the prediction. Clients want certainty. Experts learn, consciously or not, to project it, even when the underlying reality is far murkier than the polished presentation suggests. The practical move here is to use base rates, what typically happens in situations like this one, rather than narrative logic. Resist the pull of the compelling story and anchor yourself to what the data actually says about outcomes in comparable situations. Fourth, loss aversion. Losses feel roughly twice as powerful, psychologically, as equivalent gains. A 50-50 bet where you might lose $100, most people need a potential upside of $150 to $200 before it feels worth it. This explains why investors hold losing stocks too long. Selling makes the loss real. Why founders pivot too late. Admitting the original idea failed is a loss. Why people stay in bad jobs, bad situations, bad strategies, long past the point of reason. And then there's the halo effect, which I saw play out painfully in my previous lab. We once hired a technician almost entirely on the strength of an impressive CV and a confident interview. The background was remarkable. The interview was polished. And within 3 months, it was clear this person had a deep resistance to feedback and couldn't follow protocols reliably. The qualities that actually mattered for the role: coachability, precision, ability to follow procedures exactly, we never really probed because the halo from the impressive credentials had already sold us. We were evaluating the story of a great hire, not the actual candidate. So what do you actually do with all of this? Because by now, I know this might all feel a little bleak. If our biases are this automatic, this deeply baked into our cognitive architecture, can we even do anything about them? Here's what Kahneman is honest about. You can't eliminate System 1. You wouldn't want to. The goal isn't to think slowly about everything. That's exhausting and impractical. The goal is to know when to engage System 2 and to build practices that make that engagement more reliable. Create friction for high-stakes decisions. Before anything hard to reverse, a major investment, a key hire, a strategic pivot, build in mandatory waiting time. Sleep on it. The certainty you feel today may look very different tomorrow morning, especially if you're emotionally activated. Do a pre-mortem on your plans. Before launching anything, imagine it's 12 months in the future and the project failed completely. Ask what happened. This forces System 2 to generate failure scenarios that System 1's optimistic storytelling would never surface on its own. And for hiring and evaluating opportunities, design a scorecard of specific, relevant criteria before you see any candidates or options. Commit to what you're evaluating before the halo has a chance to form. This is the lesson my lab learned the hard way. Here's what I want to leave you with. Most people, even smart, analytically trained people, even people with PhDs who design experiments for a living, have no mental model for why they believe what they believe or decide what they decide. I was one of those people. I nearly learned that lesson the expensive way. The person who understands cognitive biases doesn't transcend human psychology. Nobody does. But they can build systems that catch their own blind spots. They can recognize the feeling of anchoring or loss aversion or substitution in real time and pause before acting. In a world where everyone has access to the same information, the edge increasingly comes from thinking more clearly. Thinking, fast and slow, is a manual for that kind of thinking, not a guarantee. A manual, you still have to do the work. But doing that work with an honest understanding of how your mind actually operates puts you miles ahead of doing it blind. That's a wrap for today's episode. If this resonated with you, head over to bullishbooks.com. I've written the full deep dive on the book with all the frameworks, examples, and practical takeaways laid out in detail. The link is in the description. And if you got value from this episode, please subscribe wherever you're listening. It genuinely helps us grow the show and keep bringing you this content every week. I'm Lei, keep building, and I'll see you in the next one.